Hello, Mr. Anderson.
Oh, it's you. I didn't know you with all your clothes on.
Classic Hollywood could make you famous, then erase you overnight. This isn't about comebacks. It's about what came after the roles stopped. The real jobs stars took to survive, to work in anonymity, or to rebuild a second life with real power. Karl Dane, waiter, cafe co-owner, odd jobs laborer. In the 1920s, Karl Dane was a familiar MGM face, a reliable comic presence in major studio pictures, including The Big Parade, 1925. Born in Denmark as Rasmus Karl Terkelsen Gottlieb, he fit the silent screen perfectly. Distinctive, readable, a type. But sound changed the math. Accents and voices became liabilities, and the business hardened around controllable images and bankable names. The story people repeat about his decline is the tidy one Hollywood prefers, the hot dog stand parable. The documented version is colder. Dane worked as a waiter in Westwood and later bought into a small cafe, hoping his name would pull customers through the door. It didn't. The cafe failed. He slid into mechanical work, carpentry, and whatever paid that week. Labor that doesn't care what your face once meant on a poster. On April 14, 1934, Karl Dane died by suicide at 47. Strip away the myth, and the ending doesn't get softer, it gets quieter. A man who had been widely seen, widely used, and then priced out of his own life. And after a fall like that, the next stories don't start with headlines. They start with wages. Louise Brooks, department store salesgirl, copywriter, survival work. Louise Brooks looked like the future on film. Modern, sharp, unreadable, in a way that felt decades ahead. But the industry didn't reward ahead of its time. It rewarded obedience and manageability, and Brooks resisted both. When work collapsed, her afterlife wasn't poetic. It was practical. Here's the documentary detail that lands like a punch because it's so ordinary. Brooks later wrote that she started at Saks Fifth Avenue in Manhattan in July 1946, earning $40 a week, working retail as a salesgirl. Just shifts, counters, and customers who often had no idea who she used to be. She was later rediscovered, reframed as an icon. But that late respect doesn't change the arithmetic underneath. Fame wasn't insurance, it was a temporary wage. When the checks stopped, she took the job that existed. And if adult stars could be reduced to a paycheck, child stars were reduced to something even colder. A memory that belonged to everyone, except the child who had to grow up. Baby Peggy, switchboard operator, clerk, manager, writer-historian. As Baby Peggy, Diana Sarah Carey was one of the silent era's most visible child performers, famous enough to sell tickets while adults negotiated the money around her. And like so many child stars of that period, protections were thin. Adult contracts, adult stakes, and an industry that moved on the moment the brand aged out. Carey later described the adult problem that follows a famous child. People recognize you for a version of you that no longer exists, and feel entitled to it. So she tried to vanish on purpose. After she married Gordon Ayers in 1938, she adopted the name Diana Ayers to separate the woman from the commodity. It wasn't vanity, it was survival. Then the after arrives in plain working nouns: switchboard operator, bookstore clerk, gift shop manager, ordinary jobs with ordinary hours, the kind where you can be tired in peace. The cruelty is the contrast. As a child, your face is everywhere. As an adult, your past is louder than your resume. And yet, she didn't stay in survival mode. She became a writer and historian of early Hollywood, turning the wreckage into testimony. In 1996, she published Whatever Happened to Baby Peggy. Not a souvenir, but a corrective record. Child star speaking in her own adult voice at last. Her story shows the deeper injury. When fame arrives before you understand it, you spend years trying to become a person again. Barbara Payton, cheap hotel drift, public collapse, survival at the edge. Barbara Payton's story is what happens when the machine stops seeing you as a product and starts seeing you as a warning. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, she was pushed as a rising actress, the standard studio promise: youth, glamour, momentum. Then came the chain reaction: scandal, addiction, instability, and tabloid oxygen that doesn't just report a fall, it accelerates it. The after years weren't quiet. They were documented like spectacle: arrests, humiliations, periods of drifting through cheap hotels, and precarious survival. The press treated deterioration as content, a human being converted into a rolling update. And she tried, at the end, to seize control of the narrative the only way she could: by putting it on paper. Her 1963 memoir, I Am Not Ashamed, reads less like rehabilitation than a last attempt to own the story while it was still hers. Barbara Payton died on May 8, 1967, at 39. When the studio era stopped investing, it didn't merely stop offering roles, it stopped offering mercy. After a tragedy like that, the next shift is almost unnerving. Not a scandal, not a spectacle, just the silence of normal work returning. Alice White, secretary. After the spotlight narrowed, Alice White didn't get a myth. She got gravity. Before she was a flapper-era name, she started in Hollywood in the least glamorous way: clerical work. She's often described as beginning as a secretary and script girl, with work connected to director Josef von Sternberg, meaning she knew the invisible jobs first. Then the movies happened fast. By the late 1920s, she was being sold as a bubbly, marketable screen personality, a type the studios believed they could repeat forever. But forever is never a promise here. By 1937-1938, her name was sinking toward the bottom of cast lists. Her final film appearance is generally cited as Flamingo Road, 1949. What makes her after-detail hit is precisely that it isn't exotic. After the screen was done, she is repeatedly described as resuming work as a secretary, the same category of job she'd known before fame, returned to without ceremony. She died in 1983, aged 78, closing the circle as cleanly as the industry rarely allows. But Hollywood has another trick when it doesn't want you seen. It doesn't throw you out. It keeps you behind the curtain. Buster Keaton, studio gag writer, uncredited comedy fixer. Keaton wasn't just a silent star, he was a mechanic of cinema. But when the studio system tightened control and his personal life deteriorated, the starring status collapsed. What didn't collapse was the value of his brain. Hollywood still wanted him, just not on the poster. By the mid-1930s, he was working again, and the record shows how cold the math could be. At Educational Pictures, he was reportedly earning $2,500 per film, until Cutbacks ended its Hollywood operation in 1937. That date matters because it explains the pivot. Not a dramatic firing, just the industry turning a dial and shutting a door. After that, Keaton returned to MGM as a gag writer, the classic downgrade that still keeps you inside the machine. He supplied material for the Marx Brothers' final MGM run, At the Circus, 1939, Go West, 1940, and The Big Store, 1941. The man who once engineered whole films now sold ideas into other people's films, often without his name attached. You can be hired for your genius and still edited out of your own influence. Your name disappears first, then your work. And if Keaton's shadow work still carried a trace of respect, there was a harsher version: the system taking your labor only if you erase your identity. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, director under a pseudonym, William Goodrich. At his peak, Arbuckle was one of silent comedy's biggest names, highly paid, widely recognized, influential enough to help pull Buster Keaton into film. Then came the catastrophe that turned a human being into a headline. On September 10, 1921, he was arrested in San Francisco in connection with the death of Virginia Ropp. What followed wasn't one trial, but three. The final acquittal came on April 12, 1922, and the story should have ended there. It didn't. On April 18, 1922, Will Hayes issued a ban against Arbuckle. The ban was rescinded in December 1922, but the stigma stayed. Even when the paperwork changed, the fear didn't. So Arbuckle did what the industry quietly demands when it wants your skills but not your face. He worked under another name. From 1924 onward, he used the pseudonym William Goodrich for directing, a disguise sturdy enough to get him hired and humiliating enough to make the point. You can trace it in dated industry breadcrumbs. In 1925, he directed The Movies under that name. Trade reporting later listed William Goodrich as director on MGM's The Red Mill. The film opened in Los Angeles on February 8, 1927, and one first-week figure reported from a theater was $4,300, publicly described as poor. That's shadow work in numbers. Same machine, different name, and the industry still judging you like a liability. The system will take your labor if you erase your name. Not redemption, controlled survival. And then, almost like a shock to the system, you reach the rare cases where the story doesn't end in survival or concealment, but in control. William Haines, Hollywood interior designer, second career authority. William Haines was one of MGM's bright leading men in the late 1920s, and by 1930 he was described as a top box office figure. Then the studio demanded control over his private life. Accounts of the ultimatum vary, but the outcome is consistent. Haines refused to abandon his long-term partner, and MGM ended his screen career in 1933. You can be valuable and still be disposable the moment you won't be managed. What follows is one of Hollywood's most dramatic reinventions because it's powered by skill, not pity. He didn't retreat. He built a second profession that quietly conquered the town. Even early observers credited him with steering Hollywood away from old silent-era frills toward something cleaner and modern. Taste as leverage. By mid-century, it became a true operation, not a side hustle. A key partnership began in 1945 when designer Ted Graeber started working with him, and the late career dates read like a resume, not a rumor. In 1971-72, Haines and Graeber decorated the Pennsylvania home of Ambassador Walter Annenberg and his wife Lee, proof this wasn't nostalgia but elite demand. Haines died in 1973. By then, he'd pulled off the rarest move on this list, not merely surviving the industry, but outranking it. The camera rejected him. The people with money hired him anyway, privately, repeatedly, into the rooms that mattered. That's not a comeback, that's leverage. Corinne Griffith, real estate developer, owning a corner of the map. Corinne Griffith was marketed as silent-era glamour, the orchid lady of the screen. But her most durable success arrived after she stepped away from film and treated stardom like startup capital. She invested, accumulated, and then moved from buying property to shaping it. In Beverly Hills, she became closely associated with commercial Four Corners holdings connected to her name. And there's an archival anchor for it. A photographed exterior view of the Corinne Griffith shops at Beverly Drive and Charleville Boulevard is dated September 1940. It's not a legend, it's a timestamp. Her power wasn't just ownership, it was scale. By 1950, she reportedly turned down an offer of $2.5 million for her Beverly Hills commercial buildings. Then she stepped into civic influence. In 1958, she fronted fundraising for a major Beverly Hills tribute, a 22-foot marble and bronze motion picture monument budgeted at $30,000, and it was unveiled on March 8, 1960. On screen, she played society. Off-screen, she became ownership, the kind that outlives applause. For others, the second life wasn't carved into buildings, it was built into a town. Charles Ferrell, Palm Springs developer, Racket Club co-founder, mayor. Charles Ferrell was a major romantic lead in late silence and early talkies. Then he pivoted before the business pushed him off the stage. Palm Springs became his second act. Not as a vacation, but as a project. In 1934, Ferrell and actor Ralph Bellamy started what became the Racket Club in Palm Springs. Initially modest, a snack bar and 2 tennis courts. The place officially opened on December 15, 1934, and quickly became part of the movie colony's routine. A swimming pool was added in 1935, and expansion followed in dated steps. Dining room enlargements in 1937 and again in 1951. Dry details, but they prove something. This wasn't a star's hobby, it was infrastructure. Ferrell's second life didn't stop at hospitality. He moved into civic power, serving as mayor of Palm Springs from 1947 to 1955. A different kind of prestige. Minutes, meetings, votes, and daylight responsibility. Some stars disappear into ordinary jobs. Ferrell did the opposite. He built a place where stars could hide, and then stepped into authority. And sometimes the deepest defiance wasn't power at all. Sometimes it was peace, the choice to live without the audience and still make something real with your hands. Janet Gaynor, oil painter, a quiet craft after being seen. Janet Gaynor's public identity is cemented in history. The first Academy Award Best Actress winner, a successful transition into sound, and a retirement that came by choice. After stepping away from acting in 1939, she built a quieter life. But quiet doesn't mean small. Her second identity wasn't scandal or reinvention by headline. It was craft, practiced hard enough to leave a paper trail. Gaynor became an accomplished oil painter of vegetable and flower still lifes. She sold over 200 paintings and had 4 gallery showings under the Wally Findlay Gallery's banner in New York, Chicago, and Palm Beach from 1975 through February 1982. Not celebrity dabbling, but sustained work with a market. And the contrast gets sharper when you remember how fragile retirement can be. In September 1982, she was seriously injured in a traffic accident in San Francisco, which makes the paintings feel even more like an act of will. A private world built patiently while the real world remains unpredictable. In a list full of collapse and concealment, Gaynor represents a rare outcome: stability through private work, the kind that doesn't need applause to be real. And finally, there's the kind of after that looks plain on paper, but is radical in practice. Decades of employment when the camera stopped caring. Dorothy Gish, theater professional, a working life after film stardom. Dorothy Gish was a major figure of early American cinema, and when talking pictures reshaped the industry, she did what many early stars couldn't. She returned to the stage and kept working in a different ecosystem. The proof isn't vague. Her later career is often summarized in dated terms. She continued performing into the post-war era, with late highlights including a 1956 Broadway revival of Life with Father and, later, the film The Cardinal, 1963. Those timestamps matter because they show a life that didn't end when silent stardom ended. It moved into a different professional rhythm. The stage is a hard second life. You don't get carried by editing or lighting. You get hired because you can do the work, night after night. Gish's after wasn't myth. It was employment, steady enough to leave a clean historical ledger. In classic Hollywood, fame wasn't a home. It was a room you rented, and when the door closed, the real story was who you became in the silence.